Drip irrigation has become a very popular practice on farms throughout Florida, both large and small. Small producers in Florida today are increasing their acreage because of the demand for local products and are trying to utilize the land that they have available to them. And drip irrigation really fits into this well. Drip irrigation is just a simple method of delivering water through a series of tubes and a drip irrigation tape that periodically has holes in the tape that allows the water to drip out. There's several advantages to small farmers for using drip irrigation. A lot of times they'll have an existing small, relatively small well on the farm that's very adequate for irrigating maybe up to 2 or 3 or 4 acres. In addition, by using drip irrigation, they can usually reduce water use by as much as 50%, and they can reduce or eliminate overhead irrigation, which helps to reduce some of the disease pressure on the farm. Also, it's very easy to inject fertilizer into the irrigation system. It costs a little bit to get these systems established on the farm, but the main expense in the components to develop the system are something that can be used for a number of years, and only the drip tape has to be replaced. So there are a number of important components in building an irrigation system, and with me today, Dr. Eric Simone, vegetable specialist in the Horticultural Sciences Department at the University of Florida, is going to help me, and we're going to work our way through a typical drip irrigation component system piece by piece to show you the use and the importance of the individual components that are necessary in a drip irrigation system. So Eric, we're going to assume here that we're starting off from a well and we've got water coming from that irrigation well that's adequate to meet the needs of the small farm. What are the things that we need to start when we build this system?
Well, the first component that you have to have close to your well is a backflow prevention device, and that's the only component that is mandated by law. This component is made out of 3 pieces. First, this piece, which has an air inlet and a low pressure drain. Then you have 2 ball valves that are going to prevent the water from going from the field back to the well. That way, if you're injecting fertilizer or chemicals, you're sure that you're not going to contaminate your well.
So the check valves, if the water does begin to back siphon towards the well, these check valves stop it here, and what little bit that goes by is able to
will flow out.
Is able to bleed out. Excellent. And that's very important. Certainly in a lot of these wells, they're going to be using their own home well, and they certainly don't want to have that risk. So that's very important.
It's more than important. It's the law.
It's the law.
The next component are pressure gauges, and we have 2 pressure gauges. We'll go back to this one in just a minute, but we're going to put this pressure gauge here to tell us what is the pressure that comes out of the well. And Bob, what do we have here next?
Well, the next part that makes this system really a favorite among small farmers with drip irrigation is the ability here to inject fertilizer into the irrigation system. And what we would do is use soluble sources of fertilizer, and as the water comes through here, we are able to turn this valve down to force water to come through this part of the system. And once it goes through here, there's a venturi component here, and that allows the fertilizer solution to be sucked up into the water stream. And we have a little filter on here to make sure that we don't have large pieces or particles that actually get sucked into the water stream. So that makes it really easy. We can go out once a week and just under a shade tree if we wanted, mix up our fertilizer, and then inject it directly into the irrigation system so that that entire zone can be fertilized that way. And that's a really efficient way of fertilizing also with drip, and most farmers have actually been able to reduce significantly the total amount of fertilizer that they use just by being able to spoon feed it in that system. So that would be the next component there. And then after we go through the venturi system, now, Eric, it looks like we've got a filter system here that we need to work with. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, we have here a cartridge filter. Here's the cartridge. The important thing here is to insert the filter after your injection point. That way, every particulate or every precipitate that you will put into your system will get filtered out.
Okay. And I have over here, Eric, a similar kind of filter with this screen inside, and the one that we've got attached here is a relatively small one that probably is only going to be sufficient for maybe up to 1/4 of an acre or something like that. But if they have a larger area that they're trying to irrigate and they need a larger filter, then they certainly make them at all different sizes. This is even a medium-sized one. They make them a lot larger than this. But it would be important to make sure that they've got the right size filter for the zone that they need to be able to irrigate. And in Florida, a lot of our wells are going to bring water in with particles that need to be filtered out, little small particles of sand and those kinds of things. So this is a really important component. If you don't get those pieces out, the drip irrigation system can be at high risk because the small holes out of which that water is going to drip is going to easily be clogged. So this is a really important component.
Yes.
The next thing that we would want to do, this is your second pressure gauge here, and that's where that's going to go. And tell us a little bit about how you would use these 2 pressure gauges in monitoring the system.
It's important to have 2 pressure gauges. The first pressure gauge gives you the pressure pretty much that comes from the well, and the second pressure gauge gives you the pressure after the filter. And if the filter is not clogged, those 2 pressures are going to be pretty close to being the same. Once you see a drop in pressure in that second gauge that's more than 5 to 8 psi, that's an indication that it's time to clean the filter. And sometimes it's going to be every week or every several days if we don't use the system a lot, and sometimes it's going to be once or twice a day if you use the system a lot. So that's another very important indicator to know how the system works.
So this really helps them without having to take this off and needlessly spend time in cleaning the filter. That sounds like a really good way of being able to do that. After it goes through the second pressure gauge here, then we're really ready pretty much to take it to the field. And we have a couple of options here. The next thing that we need to do is to be able to build in the pressure regulation into the system. And a typical pump might be as much as 30 or 40 or maybe even 80 pounds of pressure on a real large pumping system. But the drip tape is manufactured to operate on relatively low pressure, something in the range of maybe 10 or 12 psi. So we've got to be able to get that pressure down. And depending on how far from this part of the system the field is located will depend on what type of pressure regulator we need. So in some cases you may have a pressure regulator here, but the preferred way of doing it is to put the pressure regulator as close to the field or the zones as we can so that we don't reduce any pressure through friction loss that we don't have to lose. So from there, we're ready to go to the field, Eric, and what do we do next?
So we're going to take the water to the field to some sort of a poly pipe right here that we can screw into the pressure regulator. And the length of this pipe, of course, depends on your system. And now the next challenge is to connect the drip tape to that poly pipe. So to do that, we're going to use a little tool that's going to make a hole, and we're going to use an adapter here. On one end is going to screw into the drip tape, and the other end is going to go into this poly pipe. So this tool is very simple. I push a hole, take the sharp end, and then snap it in. And so once it snaps, you hear it snap. You're now ready to connect the drip tape to it.
So this is just a little short piece of the actual drip tape that we're going to be using in the field.
Of course, usually this is much longer. It can be up to 200-300 feet long based on your field. And what is that thing that you've put at the end?
Well, on the end here, if we were to get to the end of the row, there's a flush cap here. And every time the system comes on, if there is materials that build up in the drip irrigation line, this little flush cap helps us to automatically get that material out of the zone every time the system comes on and turns off. And there's a little spring in here that allows the water to flow out of the end up until you get to about maybe 2 pounds of pressure or so, and then that spring closes that particular unit. And I can see on this particular tape, Eric, there's a couple of holes, one here and one there. So in this case, we have an emitter every 12 inches, which is pretty standard for our industry here in Florida.
Very good. So what tools did we need to put all these things together?
Well, it's pretty simple. For the parts where we're using PVC, a simple set of PVC cutters and a little bit of glue and a little bit of basic knowledge about putting together PVC is really all that we've needed. Maybe a wrench to tighten things down a little bit.
Here and over here.
But it really is pretty simple. Most folks can do this without having a lot of experience in working with the plumbing. And this little part here makes it really easy to hook up the drip irrigation parts. I just have one last thing here that is certainly optional, just like the fertigation is actually optional. You could find other ways of fertilizing it, but this is a solenoid valve, an electric solenoid valve that would help us to automate the system. So if we were going to be gone doing other chores, we could set this up, hook it up to a simple irrigation timer or irrigation control box, and we'd be able to automate the system and to have it come on once, twice, 3 times, maybe even 4 times a day for however long we need to be able to do it. They can go out and manually turn it on and off, but if they have the capability of automating it with these simple solenoid valves and an irrigation controller, I think that they'll find that very helpful in managing their own time. So Eric, thanks for showing how we would put these components together. We have had a lot of success with small farmers and a lot of interest in putting together these drip irrigation systems on small farms. And in other modules, we'll be able to show actually how this is implemented in the field on various sizes of systems. So Eric, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Bob.